In our last episode, we talked logo logic. We talked building your brand's mark. And in the episode, we broke down and kind of went through some of the things to keep in mind when you are crafting your logo and brand representation. And as I mentioned in the episode, that depending on how much of the information I wanted to dish out at one time, that it may be smart to split it into two separate episodes for understanding. And so that's what I ended up doing. So you have last episode, which is logo logic and brand understanding. And today we hop into part 2 of that, color codes, building your brand's spectrum. Okay. This is Mel Code. Hello. Once again, what is up, world? It is your boy, Stefan Amir, aka Steph Melvin, and I'd like to welcome you back to Mel Code. Okay, and in today's episode, we are going to explore color as a language, okay? How it communicates emotion, intention, and memory. We're going to learn how to craft a palette that aligns with your messaging and, helps stick into your audience's minds. All right. So without further ado, let's hop right in. Well, before we do that, let me just kind of recap. As I talked about in the beginning, in our beginning intro, last episode was logo logic and understanding, some of your thought processing that you should have before developing your actual logo. And what I did in last episode is wanted to separate that from what colors you applied to the logo and kind of left it kind of standard for coming up with the imaging itself, separate from the colors you assigned to the image. Okay. And so today what we're going to break down is going through the same kind of things you want to keep in mind when applying color to that logo. Okay. That's where we'll begin. Okay. Let's hop right in. Code 1. You gotta understand the color psychology, okay? How colors influence emotion and decision making. Colors, like words, translate their own meaning. They have their own signature that they carry, and society has also developed ways of refining those things to kind of stick in our minds in a way that resonates, so that when we see certain colors, they trigger certain emotions. And so keeping in mind some of these things, I want to break down some colors to you and just kind of give you a general synopsis on like what they can translate, and then maybe even go into some examples that we see in our everyday. So like, for example, let's do red. It's a prominent color. Obviously you see it in stop signs all the time, but red indicates attention. It indicates a call to action. It indicates urgency. So passion and urgency would be like red. Now contrasting to that, say we say blue, which is more, light and fluffy. That kind of gives more like trust and loyalty. Think like AT&T. Or the cell phone company, Dell Computers, IHOP, Lowe's, these are all rooted in blue because they're thinking about trust and loyalty. When you think about Lowe's, you think about this being your trusted hardware store. You think about Dell, you think about a trusted brand of computer name. You think quality, you think IHOP, it becomes the breakfast spot, the family hub. When you think of loyalty, you think of trust. Create same thing with AT&T, customer loyalty. Being about their promise of great service. And say you say you want to throw in a green. I'm looking at a peppermint I have sitting right here. So we say green. Green is often like growth and balance. So you'll see like banks may go with a green. Because you think about financial growth, not necessarily money, but like TD Bank. TD Bank is a primary example. They use green for their logo. What else? Who else uses green in their logo? Starbucks uses green in their logo. Tic Tac uses green in their logo. You have who else? Whole Foods uses green. And you think about growth and balance of health. And so they play with green in their logo. Then you have like, your purples, which are more like, your creativity, your luxury. I think like, when I think creativity, I think like more like fantasy. I think like a Willy Wonka. That candy, that's their primary color is purple. Yahoo, for emails, they're purple. FedEx, Taco Bell, what else? Creativity, Twitch. A lot of people, we're in the streaming generation. Twitch logo is purple. So, those are just some rough ideas right there of just color and association. For 3ME and a lot of things I do with underneath the Melwood brand, I use black and white, which is power and clarity. Since Melwood offers products and services, I think clarity, and when I think power, I think like a hub of information. Black and white is where I leaned and anchored to. That's a really strong color palette. My recommendation is that, when you're thinking of your logo, you pick out two. You pick out one base foundation color, okay, and one secondary color for accents, and that can help maximize your consistency. So for example, that'd be like the secondary color would be like the color that falls on your text on your website, or your text on your your information or your posts, things of that stature. Okay, so again, all of this, the colors you choose to assign to your logo is a part of understanding the color psychology. All right. So keep that in mind as you're out there, you're going out into the world, living your life, going through your everyday. Look around, pay attention to the signs you see, the businesses you see, the colors they chose, and what resonates for the business that it is, and what kind of things come to mind. Okay? All right. Code 2, building your palette. How to structure and balance your color combination. All right. So you're going to want to start with a base color. Okay, that base color is your main emotion. All right, the main emotion you want to convey. And as I said, if you add the secondary color, that adds tone, that helps with contrast, it helps with depth. And I just recommend sticking to two. Keep it simple. I recommend maybe like looking up a color wheel. Kind of looking at how colors unify, how they relate to one another. I know like certain apps like Adobe Color, and different programs of Adobe Photoshop, the apps themselves generate color palettes. So, you can just kind of digitally kind of play with your design and play with the colors and, be creative. I also recommend, after you're done, convert them to a hex, a JPEG, RGB, CMYK, which I don't think I've ever used before, but just making sure that you bounce the different colors that you like them, and different ideas to try out, to make sure that you can kind of have the consistency across all your platforms, depending on what files they require for uploading. All right, let's move on to code 3, application and consistency. All right, so applying color across all platforms for cohesion, as I was just talking about. So you want to establish your color hierarchy. All right. So whatever your primary logos, headers, like, those will be all of your base color. But then when you start getting into your secondary colors, your accents, your neutral tone backgrounds, however you want to do it, those are what amplifies the look of your base. All right. So I recommend using accent colors for like emphasis on certain pieces, or maybe like certain call to actions. Maybe load your palette onto like Canva or Photoshop, as I mentioned, and then kind of keeping your files on hand in the system, so that as you render them or change them, they're still following the same pneumatic structure. I'd even go as far as to say to print out your designs, kind of see how they look on different things. If you're into merch, trying out different types, whether you're doing vinyl, whether you're doing color transfer, whatever it is might be, because sometimes certain colors print differently. Certain colors that you're able to get in ink, you might not be able to match the same tone in vinyl, like it shifts. So I recommend being playful, being creative, Again, trying it on different fabrics. Sometimes the tone or color of a fabric makes a certain color pop off of it differently, and you want to be aware of your design, and the garments and whatever else you might be doing and promoting, how that all plays together. Because again, colors can mess up a very good design, okay, as well as vice versa. So we want to be sure that before we go promoting or really rolling out anything we're working on, or introducing ourselves to the world, we have these pieces thought about, and understanding how these show up on each medium. All right, let's get into the Amir method. AMIR: analyze, manifest, implement, reinvent. The Amir method. Cheer. All right, so A, analyze. You want to study how colors behave within your field, what emotions you want to own, and what emotions it is you want to convey to your audience. As I said, I gave tons of examples earlier, and as I was going through some of the colors, as I was saying, like if you're going to do red, thinking like sense of urgency, great for call to actions. Blue with trust and loyalty, that's great for like tech or corporate brands. And then like green, we'll think wellness, health and wellness brands. Purple, I think creative and luxury, ideal for like artistic brands, premium work kind of thing. And as I always said with black and white, that's always a great, strong anchor of a color palette. So just be mindful of the colors you're choosing. There's tons of colors to choose from. Like I said, there's tons of information online that, break down, maybe some of the idealization and some of the emotions that colors convey. Feel free to dig into it, do the research, chill. Then you want to manifest. All right. Imagine your color palette in motion. Imagine it on your social media. Imagine it on your merchandise. Imagine it, on some, Batman light projecting, or, a projector, as your background. Dig into all of that. Imagine it in these different realms and what looks good, the different ways you want to see it, how the colors might pop, what looks good in these environments, from on stage to on paper. All right. As I said, that's a part of testing. Implement. You want to test your colors across your screens, your materials, adjust the tone for more accuracy, adjust it for consistency. Some colors, when you're editing colors online, sometimes if you're not just selecting a color, sometimes you're able to kind of select the cursor and slide it up or down to kind of get the right shade or gradient you're looking for. Take note of the gradients that you're using. Write those numbers down. Sometimes, depending on another website or how things are projected, it may be slightly different on another website, but you want to be mindful of the major platforms and how colors pop up on them. Okay? So go into testing your colors when you're in your implementation stage. All right? And that always brings us to our reinvent. Okay? Evolve your shades seasonally, while keeping your core identity, as your signature. So, certain drops, Christmas, Valentine's Day, you might get a little fancy, get a little saucy, add a little mix, and that's all fine and dandy. As long as you're keeping your core the same and everything reverts back to original. All right. Color is, the language of memory. When you control your color spectrum, you control how people remember you. And that's what the whole purpose of all of this is, right? There's certain brands and certain businesses, as I said before, you associate them with the color, not necessarily just the logo. And the goal is to get your brand to be identifiable and resonate under both. Okay? It has been awesome rocking with you guys. This has been another episode of Mail Code, technically part 2 to our last episode, Logo Logic. And here we are now doing our color codes and building your color spectrum. I'm so excited. Thank you guys for joining me once again for another fun episode, another informational episode, and I will see you guys all in episode 8. All right. Cheers.